The dense alien jungle of Carvel shimmered beneath a pale green sun that never seemed to set. The humid air was heavy with the scent of metallic pollen, and every leaf seemed alive, breathing softly as if the forest itself were watching. Jack Rayner stood among a line of 30 cadets from 17 different worlds, all wearing the gray survival suits issued by the Galactic Academy. His uniform hung a little loosely on his lean frame, and his unarmored skin looked vulnerable compared to the chitin, scales, and protective plating of the others. The instructors stood on the metal platform above, their sleek helmets reflecting the cadets below. When the signal light blinked from red to blue, the entire crowd fell silent. The test was about to begin. The voice of the lead instructor, Commander Vorin, echoed through the comm system. "This is the final evaluation. You will be released into the Carvel sector for 7 planetary rotations. You must endure against the predators. There will be no resupply. There will be no extraction until the end. The moment you enter the field, the countdown begins." His tone was calm, clinical, as if he were speaking about a weather report, not a survival ordeal. Jack swallowed and adjusted the strap on his backpack. Around him, the alien cadets exchanged murmurs in dozens of dialects. He caught fragments of laughter from a tall creature with translucent skin, its inner organs pulsing faintly with blue light. "The soft one won't last an hour," the creature whispered, its gaze sliding toward him. Another cadet, a reptilian female from Zarka, snorted, her tail twitching with amusement. "Humans are fragile," she said. "No claws, no armor, no venom. He will be the first to scream." Jack heard every word, but he didn't react. He had learned long ago that underestimation was humanity's greatest camouflage. The gates of the arena opened with a deep, grinding sound. A gust of warm air swept through the platform, carrying the faint, rancid stench of rotting meat and soil soaked with something far older than rain. The forest beyond the gate swayed slowly, as if breathing in anticipation. The instructors gave no further warning. A green light flashed overhead, and the cadets surged forward. Jack moved last. He didn't run like the others, who bolted into the undergrowth in groups, shouting coordinates to their teammates through headsets. Instead, he stepped carefully over the threshold, feeling the change in air pressure and temperature the moment his boots sank into the soft ground. The sounds of the jungle surrounded him, buzzing insects, distant shrieks, and a low rhythmic pulse that he suspected was the movement of something massive beneath the canopy. The first hour passed in silence. He moved along a shallow ridge, memorizing the terrain. The soil was damp and clay-like. It could be molded or carved if needed. The trees had thick, spongy trunks that exuded a resin with a sharp, acidic smell. He tested it with a stick. It hissed faintly, eating through bark. Useful for traps, perhaps, he noted. Above him, flocks of translucent avians scattered whenever the forest grew too quiet. The quiet meant something large was near. From the distant valley, a single scream pierced the air, high, cut short, and replaced by a low crunch. Jack froze, gripping the small survival knife strapped to his thigh. He didn't move for nearly a minute. When the jungle resumed its murmuring, he exhaled slowly and continued forward, marking the trees with small notches using his blade. Every few steps, he paused and listened. He wasn't running from predators. He was mapping the rhythm of their world. By dusk, when the green sun sank lower and the forest turned a deep emerald hue, Jack found a small clearing surrounded by roots large enough to crawl under. It was defensible but open enough to see movement. He unpacked his survival gear, a single thermal blanket, a compact fire starter, and 3 rations of nutrient gel. That was all. He could almost hear Commander Vorin's voice again. "You are not here to survive comfortably. You are here to adapt." He gathered dead branches and pressed them against the roots, forming a crude shelter. The humidity clung to his skin, and his breathing grew shallow. Far in the distance, something roared, a deep, guttural sound that vibrated through the soil and into his bones. It was followed by the distant, panicked chatter of other cadets. The predators had been released. Jack stayed awake, crouched beneath the roots, his knife resting on his knee. He didn't light a fire. Fire meant light, and light meant visibility. Instead, he focused on the sounds. Every rustle, every faint snap of a twig told a story. Somewhere to the east, another scream echoed, this one longer, more desperate. Then silence again. He had read about the creatures bred for these trials. Carvel predators were a mix of reptilian and mammalian genes. Their nervous systems accelerated to react faster than any sapient being could counter. Their vision was heat-based, their muscles corded with biosteel fibers. They were not meant to be defeated, only evaded. Yet, as he sat in the darkness, Jack couldn't accept the idea of running for 7 days. That wasn't survival. That was waiting to die. He glanced at the knife in his hand, its dull surface reflecting a faint glint of light from the bioluminescent insects hovering nearby. He turned it over and began to think, not about fighting the predators directly, but about controlling what they didn't understand: structure, sound, and terrain. The night deepened, and the jungle began to sing with the haunting cries of unseen creatures. Jack crawled from his shelter, careful not to disturb the ground too much. The air had changed. It was thicker, tinged with iron. He found the remains of a small animal near the clearing, its bones half buried in mud. He cleaned them with a strip of cloth and hung them from a vine near his shelter, listening as the wind made them clink softly together. The sound was faint, but directional. If the predators moved nearby, the chimes would warn him before they saw him. Hours passed. The forest seemed endless, a maze of green-black shadows and distant lights. But Jack's mind remained sharp. He started memorizing the tempo of the environment, the way insects paused when danger approached, the seconds between each gust of wind, the subtle vibration of the ground before movement. When a nearby branch cracked, he pressed himself flat against the soil, counting heartbeats until the sound faded. By dawn, the jungle was littered with signs of slaughter. Jack found claw marks carved into a tree nearly half a meter deep and footprints large enough to crush a human torso. In the distance, the bodies of 2 cadets were strewn near a stream, their armor shredded, their survival kits missing. He approached only long enough to confirm they were beyond help. Then he took what was left of their tools, a length of cord, a piece of sharpened plating, and a strip of flexible tubing. Tools, not trophies. As the second sunbeam broke through the canopy, Jack stopped to rest near a hollow tree. His pulse had slowed, and a strange calm filled him. The predators were stronger, faster, and designed to hunt. But he had something they didn't, a mind that refused to obey instinct. He could plan. He could listen. He could build. Behind him, another roar erupted, closer than before. The ground trembled under his boots. He didn't panic. He marked the tree nearest him with 3 quick cuts of his knife, a silent sign to himself for later orientation, and ran deeper into the forest, not in a straight line, but weaving between roots and fallen trunks, making it impossible for his scent to follow a single path. He moved like a shadow, every movement deliberate, every breath measured. The trial had only begun, but already he understood what the instructors wanted to see. Not strength, not speed, ingenuity. They wanted to know what a human would do when stripped of weapons and hope. As the forest grew brighter, he reached a ridge that overlooked the valley. From there, he could see smoke trails rising, some from fires lit too early, others from crashed shelters. Distant screams drifted up through the canopy. He sat down, observing. Every mistake the others made was a lesson written in sound and motion. The forest had rules. He only needed to learn them faster than the others died. When night came again, the predators would hunt anew. And by then, Jack would not just hide. He would begin to build. By the time the second dawn painted the canopy in hues of green and gold, the forest had already swallowed half of the cadets. The instructors' drones glided silently above the treetops, recording every scream, every chase, every failed attempt at defiance. Jack didn't look up. He knew he was being watched, But the eyes from above didn't concern him. It was the unseen things beneath the canopy that demanded his attention. The slow breathing of predators hidden within the mist, the soft crunch of soil disturbed by something moving against the wind. The human's heartbeat had slowed to match the rhythm of the jungle. He no longer felt fear, only focus. He crouched beside a narrow stream that glowed faintly from the bioluminescent moss along its banks. His reflection looked different now. The smooth, pale face that had entered the trial was streaked with dirt, his eyes hollowed by sleeplessness, but sharpened with determination. He washed his hands, not out of vanity but necessity. Clean hands meant better grip, better control. As he filled his flask, he noticed deep claw marks gouged into the rocks nearby. They weren't random. They formed a repeating pattern, like the creature that made them was marking territory. He traced the marks with his finger and studied the spacing between them. The distance told him everything. The predator was tall, perhaps twice his height, with claws long enough to pierce bone. It moved on two legs, but the depth of the impressions suggested bursts of speed uncommon for bipedal species. It hunted silently and struck with precision. Jack began tracking, not to find the beast, but to learn from it. He followed the faint trail for nearly an hour, careful to keep his steps light. The forest's sounds shifted gradually. The high-pitched hum of insects faded, replaced by a deep, resonant silence that vibrated through his chest. That silence was warning enough. He dropped to the ground, lying flat beneath the thick ferns. Moments later, a shadow passed overhead, massive and sinuous. Through the gaps in the foliage, he glimpsed scales the color of tarnished silver and a narrow head crowned with bony ridges. The creature paused, its nostrils flaring as it sniffed the air. Jack's pulse slowed further. He pressed his body into the soil, masking his scent with mud. The predator's gaze swept the clearing before it vanished into the mist, its movement soundless. When the danger passed, he didn't rise immediately. Instead, he examined the ground where the creature had walked. The impressions were sharp, the soil compressed deeply near the toes, weight concentrated forward. It was a sprinter, a hunter built for ambush. But even ambush predators had limits. They relied on patterns, sensory advantage, and familiarity with terrain. He could use that. He could turn their instincts against them. By midday, the heat intensified. Jack sought shelter under a massive tree whose roots curled upward like the ribs of a buried titan. Beneath the roots, the air was cooler, shaded from the relentless light. He gathered fragments of bone he had collected the previous night, small, splintered pieces of ribs and vertebrae, brittle but workable. He began scraping them against a stone, sharpening them into points. The process was slow, meditative. He worked with patience, testing the strength of each piece before setting it aside. The sound of bone grinding against rock echoed faintly through the roots, mixing with the heartbeat of the jungle. His mind moved faster than his hands. He pictured the terrain, the predator's likely routes, and the paths where cadets had fled. Every chase left traces, the broken branches, the trampled leaves, the drag marks from fallen prey. The beasts would follow those trails again, confident in their dominance. That confidence was what he planned to exploit. A sudden rustle from behind made him grip his knife instinctively. From the undergrowth emerged another cadet, a small amphibian-like alien with shimmering green skin and terrified eyes. The creature stumbled, panting heavily. "Help!" it croaked, its voice trembling. Jack remained silent. He had learned to distrust sudden encounters. "Please," the alien repeated, looking over its shoulder. "It's coming." Before Jack could respond, a roar shattered the air. The ground shook as the predator burst through the trees, its claws tearing into the soil. The alien screamed and tried to run, but the creature's tail swept across the clearing, sending him crashing into a tree with a sickening crack. Jack didn't move. He watched the predator drag its prey away, disappearing into the thick shadows, leaving streaks of blood across the moss. He waited until the sound faded entirely before he approached the remains of the attack. The alien's body was gone, but pieces of shattered armor and fragments of bone remained. He picked up a curved piece of rib bone, running his thumb along its smooth edge. It was strong, flexible, and curved just right for what he needed. The forest had given him his first material test. He began shaping the bone into a hook, using friction and patience. As the sun sank behind the dense canopy, Jack's small pile of bone fragments had turned into crude tools, hooks, spikes, and sharpened splinters. He stored them carefully in a makeshift pouch made from torn fabric. He wasn't just collecting bones, he was building the foundation of defense. As night descended, the jungle changed again. The temperature dropped sharply, and the mist grew thick, coating everything in damp condensation. The predators' roars echoed in the distance, more frequent now. The cadets' panic could be heard too. Shouts, gunfire from malfunctioning plasma pistols, cries for help that faded abruptly. Jack listened to each sound and cataloged its direction, duration, and timing. He was building a mental map of the death spreading across Carvel. He set out once more, this time moving downhill toward a cluster of broken trees where he had noticed unusual vibrations earlier. When he arrived, he found a pit-like depression in the ground filled with water and bones, hundreds of them, gnawed clean. The predators had feeding zones, and this was one of them. That realization sent a spark of understanding through him. Predators were territorial but predictable. They would return here, following scent and instinct. He could use that certainty as a trap. He began testing the soil with his knife. The earth was soft, pliable, perfect for digging. Using a fallen branch as a lever and his hands as tools, he dug a narrow pit about 2 meters deep. His palms blistered, his arms burned, but he didn't stop. When the pit was ready, he lined the bottom with sharpened bones, angling them upward like fangs. Then he covered the pit with a thin layer of vines and leaves, disguising it perfectly. It wasn't large enough to kill the creature outright, but it would wound, and a wounded predator became both vulnerable and predictable. To mark the perimeter, he needed sound. He took the smallest bones he had left and tied them together with thin vines, hanging them from branches at different heights. When the wind passed through, the bones clicked softly, forming a melody only he understood. Each tone corresponded to a direction. If the wind carried a low note, something was moving from the east. If the pitch sharpened, danger was closer. The forest, once a hostile void, began to speak to him through the language of sound. Hours passed as he adjusted the chimes, testing how the vibrations shifted with each gust. The forest no longer frightened him. It was becoming an extension of his awareness. He could sense movement long before it arrived. When one of the bone chimes rang out sharply, he froze. The sound came from the south, unexpected, too strong for mere wind. He dropped to the ground, gripping his knife. A shadow moved between the trees, massive and deliberate. The creature was returning. He waited, his body still as stone. The predator's outline emerged, a towering shape with silver scales glinting under the faint light. It sniffed the air, searching. Its claws dug into the soil near the pit. Jack held his breath. Another step, another. Then came the sound, the muffled crack of vines breaking. The beast lunged forward, and in an instant the ground gave way. The forest exploded with noise as the creature crashed into the pit, impaled by the sharpened bones. Its roar shook the trees. Jack didn't move. He watched, every muscle locked, as the creature thrashed, its blood spraying across the leaves. After a few moments, the struggle ceased. The jungle went silent again, save for the faint chiming of bones swaying in the wind. Jack stepped closer, cautious but steady. The creature was dead. He knelt beside it, studying the anatomy, muscular structure, claw size, joint flexibility. Every detail was information. Knowledge was survival. He took several bones from its limbs, larger and stronger than any he had found before. These would become the basis for new traps, perhaps even weapons. He whispered under his breath, a quiet acknowledgement not of victory, but respect. "You were made to hunt," he said softly. "Now your bones will help me endure." When he finally returned to his shelter, dawn was approaching. The chimes whispered gently through the mist, carrying a rhythm that seemed almost alive. He sat beside them, exhausted but unbroken. Above, the drones continued to record, and in the control tower, Commander Vorin watched the humans' progress in silence. "He adapts faster than expected," one of the instructors remarked. Vorin's metallic voice replied, "He doesn't adapt. He transforms." The forest was no longer just a battleground. For Jack, it had become an instrument, a vast, living system waiting to be tuned. And with each passing hour, he was learning to play it. The third dawn came without warning. The sky above Carvel was hidden behind layers of green mist, and the light that filtered through the trees was dim, cold, and colorless. Jack hadn't slept properly in 2 days. His mind was too sharp for rest, his body running on the strange rhythm of instinct and calculation that had replaced exhaustion. The air smelled of blood and rain, and every leaf shimmered with moisture as if the jungle itself was sweating. The pit from the previous night had become silent. No movement, no breath from the creature that had fallen into it. He had used the remaining hours to harvest the strongest bones and clean them near the stream, carving them into tools that fit precisely into his palm. Each one was smooth, balanced, and deadly in its simplicity. He no longer thought of the instructors watching from above. The cameras, the drones, the sensors scattered across the forest meant nothing now. The only thing that mattered was the sound of the wind and the faint hum of danger. When the first bone chime rang with a soft metallic whisper, he looked up. It was not the sound of wind. It was movement. Something had triggered it. He crouched low, peering between the thick vines. In the distance, 2 cadets stumbled through the undergrowth. Both were from the Kirathi species, their insectoid forms glistening with fluid under the green light. One of them limped heavily, his leg torn and leaking dark liquid. The other half carried him, scanning the surroundings nervously. Jack watched their erratic motion, the desperation in their gestures. He could hear the guttural clicks of their speech, sharp and fast, filled with panic. They didn't see him. Then came the roar, a terrible, familiar vibration that rolled through the forest like thunder. The cadets froze. One of them shouted something in a high-pitched tone that cracked with fear. Before they could move, the predator appeared from behind the trees, its scales reflecting the faint sunlight like shards of armor. Its eyes glowed faintly orange. The wounded cadet tried to flee but tripped over a root. The second tried to drag him, but the creature was already upon them. The forest erupted in screams and tearing flesh. Jack remained still, his face expressionless. He had learned that movement during feeding drew attention. The jungle enforced its laws brutally and swiftly. When silence returned, he waited several minutes before approaching the scene. The creature was gone, but the aftermath remained. Blood smeared on bark, fragments of carapace, and the faint trail of crushed ferns where the beast had retreated. Jack examined the area carefully, then turned his gaze to the trees around it. The predators had developed a pattern. They hunted in wide circles, returning to feeding sites after intervals of rest. If one had killed here, it would be back soon, confident in dominance. That arrogance was what he needed. He moved quickly, measuring the ground by step and depth. The soil was firm enough near the roots but loose in the center, a perfect place for a fall. He began to dig again, methodical and silent, using a sharpened femur as a spade. The rhythm of digging became hypnotic, each motion smooth and precise. Sweat dripped down his face, mixing with the soil. When the pit was deep enough, he reinforced the walls with interlocked ribs and branches to prevent collapse. The spikes he placed at the bottom were not random this time. He angled them outward, designed not only to wound, but to trap movement. When he was done, he stood over the pit and studied it with the same quiet satisfaction a craftsman might have for a well-built instrument. Then he moved to the trees and hung more bone chimes. These were tuned differently, some higher, some lower, their tones marking distances. The wind that passed through them created a haunting melody that carried across the clearing. The forest seemed to whisper back. As he finished, he heard a faint sound behind him, something softer than footsteps, a slow dragging in the dirt. He turned sharply, raising his knife, but the figure that emerged was not a predator. It was a cadet, a female from the Avril species, humanoid but with pale green skin and wide black eyes that reflected light like mirrors. She was limping and clutching her side, her breathing ragged. "Please," she gasped, her voice trembling. "Don't hurt me." Jack lowered his knife slightly but didn't step closer. "Quiet," he whispered. "You're making noise." She shook her head weakly. "It killed my partner. It's coming back." Her words dissolved into a sob. Jack's expression didn't change. He motioned toward a large root system near his trap. "Hide there," he said. "Don't move, no matter what happens." She nodded shakily and crawled toward the spot, vanishing beneath the tangled roots. Then he waited. The air grew heavier, the wind slower. The chimes rattled once, twice, then fell still. That stillness meant only one thing. The predator was close. Jack crouched behind a fallen trunk, his hand gripping the knife. The jungle went silent except for the faint heartbeat echoing in his ears. Then the sound came, a deep growl, low and resonant, followed by the wet sound of soil shifting under immense weight. The creature stepped into the clearing. Its nostrils flared as it sniffed the air, drawn to the scent of blood from the earlier kill. Jack watched it move, graceful and terrible, each motion filled with predatory precision. When it stepped closer to the pit, the wind picked up, brushing through the chimes. The sound distracted the creature for an instant. It looked up, curious, its head tilting slightly. That hesitation was all Jack needed. The predator stepped forward, its front limb pressing against the thin cover of vines. The ground gave way beneath it with a sickening crunch. The creature roared as it fell, impaling itself on the spikes below. The Avril cadet gasped softly from her hiding place, but Jack held up a hand to silence her. The creature wasn't dead yet. It thrashed violently, its claws tearing into the pit's walls. Jack moved quickly, grabbing one of his sharpened bone spears and driving it through the creature's throat. The roar turned into a choking gurgle before fading into silence. When the stillness returned, Jack climbed down carefully and retrieved what he could. The beast's blood was thick and dark, and he coated the tips of his weapons in it. The acid-like properties of the fluid hissed faintly against bone, hardening it into something stronger. He tested the weight of one spear, then looked up at the trembling cadet. "Come out," he said quietly. She crawled from the roots, her wide eyes fixed on the pit. "You killed it," she whispered. "You actually killed it." Jack didn't respond. He began collecting the vines that covered the clearing, tying them into knots. "It won't be the last one," he said. "The noise will attract others." She shivered. "What are you going to do?" He paused, glancing at her. "Build more." They worked together through the day, though she moved slowly from her wounds. Jack noticed her watching him, not with fear anymore, but with a strange mix of curiosity and disbelief. She asked once, softly, "Why do you stay instead of running like the others?" He didn't look up from his work. "Because running teaches nothing. This forest has rules. Once you understand them, it's no longer a forest. It's a system." As the light faded, they finished 2 additional traps and extended the perimeter of chimes. The sounds now formed a strange harmony that seemed almost deliberate, like a song that belonged to the wind itself. Jack could distinguish every note: north, south, danger, safety. The Avril cadet couldn't. To her, it was just noise. But she trusted him, because somehow, amidst the chaos, he looked as if he knew exactly what he was doing. When night fell, they took refuge beneath the roots. Jack didn't sleep. His ears were attuned to the music above. Every rattle and whisper meant something. At one point during the night, he heard a low note, something heavy moving near the traps, but it didn't approach further. The predators were beginning to sense the danger in this section of the jungle. Just before dawn, as the mist began to clear, the Avril cadet finally spoke again, her voice barely audible. "What will you do when the week ends?" Jack stared into the dim forest. "Leave," he said, but not empty-handed. She frowned. "What do you mean?" He turned his gaze toward the line of chimes swaying gently in the wind. "Every creature here hunts the same way, by power and fear. The Academy thinks survival means endurance. It doesn't. It means learning faster than death does." She didn't answer, but her eyes lingered on him with quiet awe. In the distance, the first morning breeze passed through the bone chimes, producing a clear, harmonious tone that resonated through the valley. It sounded almost human, a soft warning to the world that something new had taken shape in the jungle. The human wasn't just surviving anymore. He was adapting the rules, bending them until even the predators themselves would hesitate to hunt near him. The forest that once swallowed cadets had begun to whisper his presence in its music. And somewhere above, in the observation tower, the instructors watching the feed were silent, unable to decide if what they were witnessing was survival or evolution. The fourth dawn arrived without a trace of warmth. The jungle was colder now, and the mist hung heavier between the trees, dimming even the faint green light that once filtered through the canopy. The bone chimes swayed above the human and the Avril cadet like ghostly ornaments, their sound low and rhythmic, warning of distant movements. Jack woke before the first echo rang and sat silently for several minutes, his back pressed to the roots that had sheltered him through the night. His senses were sharp, his muscles tense but steady. His mind no longer drifted between thoughts of escape or survival. The forest had changed him into something else, something that observed, calculated, and created in equal measure. The Avril cadet stirred beside him, her breath shallow, her eyes flicking open with fatigue. She whispered, "Is it morning already?" He nodded. "Morning doesn't matter here. Time only means how long until something hunts again." She didn't reply, and her silence told him she understood. She looked weaker than before. The wound at her side had grown darker, the edges swollen. Infection was setting in, and there was no medical aid left. He tore a strip of fabric from his sleeve, soaked it in clean water, and pressed it against her wound without speaking. She winced, but didn't complain. Outside, the jungle stirred. The chimes trembled faintly, a pattern Jack now recognized not as random wind, but as subtle vibration through the air caused by footsteps. He froze, listening. It wasn't a predator this time. The steps were lighter, uneven, cautious. Another survivor. He motioned for the Avril to stay hidden and crept forward, crouching low under the vines. Through the thick leaves, he spotted a shape. A tall figure covered in dark blue scales, carrying a plasma pistol that flickered weakly with dying power. It was a Tharn cadet, one of the more aggressive species in the trial. The Tharn's weapon was cracked, its charge indicator flashing red, and his breathing was erratic. He was frightened. Jack waited until the cadet passed between two trees before stepping into view, silent as a shadow. The Tharn spun instantly, aiming the pistol at his chest. Jack raised his hands slightly. "If you fire, you'll draw them," he said calmly. The alien hesitated, his narrow pupils narrowing. "Human," he hissed, his voice filled with tension. "You should be dead." Jack's expression didn't change. "So should you." The Tharn's grip on the weapon tightened. "I lost my team. The predators—" He stopped mid-sentence, his gaze flicking to the chimes hanging above. "What is that sound?" Jack looked up briefly. "Protection." The Tharn frowned. "You made those?" "Yes," Jack answered. "They tell me what's coming before I see it." The alien scoffed, though unease flickered across his face. "Primitive." Jack didn't argue. "Primitive works," he said simply. Technology fails here. Before the Tharn could reply, a sharp note echoed through the air, the kind that came only when something massive disturbed the far chimes. Jack's body tensed. "Move," he whispered. The alien froze. "What?" Jack didn't waste time explaining. He grabbed the Tharn's arm and pulled him behind the nearest trunk. A split second later, the ground trembled with a heavy thud. Through the mist, the faint outline of a predator emerged, its elongated limbs slicing through vines effortlessly. The Tharn's hand shook around his pistol. "I can shoot it," he whispered. Jack shook his head sharply. No light, no sound. The predator's movement was deliberate, slow, its nostrils flaring as it sniffed the air. The bone chimes whispered softly, marking its every step. Jack could tell by the frequency that it was circling, probing for scent. The Avril was still back at the shelter, vulnerable. He couldn't let it get close. He reached into his satchel and pulled out a shard of bone coated in dried blood. He threw it across the clearing. It landed several meters away with a faint thud. The predator's head snapped toward the sound, then bolted after it with terrifying speed. Jack counted in his head, 1, 2, 3, then signaled the Tharn to follow. They moved quickly, careful to stay low. When they reached the shelter, the Avril was waiting, her wide eyes filled with fear. "It's close," she whispered. Jack nodded. "It's circling, but it'll find the bait soon." The Tharn stepped forward, glaring at him. "You risked my life to save this one?" Jack met his gaze calmly. "I risked nothing. You're still alive." The Tharn hissed in irritation but didn't argue further. As the day progressed, Jack expanded the trap system. The Tharn watched him work, confusion written on his face. "You dig holes and hang bones, human," he said, his tone half mocking. "This isn't war, it's madness." Jack didn't look up. "No," he said, tightening a vine. "It's design." He motioned for the Tharn to step back, then triggered one of his smaller mechanisms. A branch snapped under tension, releasing a cascade of sharpened stones that swung downward before embedding into the soil. The Tharn flinched, his crest rising. "You made that without tools?" Jack finally turned to him. "With logic. The forest gives everything. You just have to listen." The Avril smiled faintly from where she sat, though the pain in her eyes deepened. She whispered, "He's not wrong." By late afternoon, the sound of distant screams echoed once again. Other cadets were dying, their signals blinking out one by one on the instructor's monitors above. In the control tower, Commander Vorin stood motionless, watching the humans' progress. His assistant spoke softly. "He's building a system. The chimes form an early warning grid. The pits are strategically placed in crosswind zones." Vorin's voice was quiet, but firm. "He's rewriting the parameters of survival." On the ground, Jack was already preparing the next phase. He used bones not just as spikes, but as anchors for defensive barriers. He tied rib fragments together into crude lattices, stacking them along natural choke points. The Tharn, now curious despite himself, began helping, his large hands perfect for bending vines into tight knots. At one point he asked, "Why bother? The exam ends in 3 days. If we hide, we can wait it out." Jack didn't stop working. Hiding isn't surviving. Surviving is learning how to stop hiding. As the sun sank, the forest's temperature dropped again. Mist rolled low across the ground, thick enough to blur shapes and sound. Jack finished securing the final barrier and stepped back, listening to the forest's breathing. The chimes spoke softly in the background. No movement. For now, silence was safety. He returned to the shelter, where the Avril slept restlessly, her wound worsening. He checked her pulse, still steady. He knew she wouldn't last much longer without real treatment. The Tharn sat opposite him, cleaning a blade made from shattered armor. "You think this will save us?" he asked. Jack looked at him, then at the dim light filtering through the canopy. "It already has. Every creature that enters this area will die before it reaches us." The Tharn snorted. You sound certain. Jack's voice was calm, unwavering. Because certainty is what keeps fear from winning. The night grew colder, and the sounds of distant predators filled the air. Then, around midnight, one of the chimes let out a harsh, unfamiliar tone. Jack stood immediately. Something's inside the perimeter. He grabbed his spear and signaled for the Tharn to follow. The Avril stirred but didn't rise. Moving quietly through the undergrowth, Jack approached the outer traps. The wind was still, yet the chimes continued to sway. That could only mean one thing: something intelligent was testing them. A shadow appeared ahead, small and fast. It wasn't one of the larger predators. It moved with purpose, crawling low before standing upright. Jack narrowed his eyes. It was another cadet, but not from his group, a surviving member of the Zurath species. The alien was covered in cuts and carried a broken scanner. He looked desperate. "Help!" the cadet shouted, stumbling forward. "Please, let me in!" Before Jack could respond, the chimes above the clearing shifted in pitch. Another sound followed, a deep growl, closer than before. The predator had been tracking the Zurath, using his panic as bait. Jack's jaw tightened. He stepped forward and shouted, "Stop!" But the Zurath didn't listen. He ran straight into the trap zone. The ground exploded in a violent crash as one of the concealed spike pits opened beneath him. His scream was brief. A split second later, the predator lunged from the shadows, falling into the same pit. The noise that followed was a mix of agony and fury that echoed through the jungle. The Tharn flinched. "You killed him." Jack's face was cold. "He killed himself. I didn't move the ground." The chimes above began to settle again, their chaotic clattering fading back into the rhythmic hum of the wind. When morning came, the jungle was quiet once more. The predators had retreated from the perimeter, sensing danger where before there was none. The traps had turned the forest's own cycle of violence inward. The humans' territory had become a dead zone, an area where even death hesitated to enter. Jack sat near the edge of the clearing, sharpening another bone. The Tharn watched him silently, the mockery gone from his eyes. "You make the forest afraid," he said softly. Jack looked up at him. "No," he replied. "I just remind it that even prey can learn." Above, the instructors noted the silence spreading through the region and marked it on their data grid as an anomaly. What they didn't realize was that the silence wasn't an absence of life. It was the sound of the jungle holding its breath, waiting for the human who had taught it a new kind of fear. The final dawn of the trial broke beneath a sky tinted in the pale hues of exhaustion. The jungle was quiet, unnaturally still, as if the world itself had paused to listen. The chimes that once danced with wind now swayed only with the slow pulse of air left behind after countless deaths. Jack sat in silence, his back pressed against a massive trunk, his spear resting across his knees. His face was thinner, marked with dirt and sleepless shadows, but his eyes held a strange, unwavering calm. Around him lay the remnants of his design, the pits, the lattices, the warning chimes, all of it standing in eerie order among the chaos of the wilderness. What once had been a place of terror had become his domain. The Avril cadet slept beside him, her breath weak but steady. He had done what he could for her infection using the antiseptic resin from the trees, though he knew it would not heal her completely. The Tharn sat nearby, sharpening a piece of metal he had scavenged, his movements methodical but quieter now. The arrogance that had once surrounded him had vanished, replaced by a quiet understanding of hierarchy, a recognition that survival no longer belonged to the strongest, but to the one who understood the world best. The final day would end with the retrieval ships. The instructors had said as much through the faint static announcements that sometimes flickered across the drone's transmission lines. But Jack didn't wait for rescue. Waiting meant helplessness, and he had long since stripped himself of that concept. He was not here to be saved. He was here to finish what the forest had started, to prove that fear could be learned, then unlearned. By mid-morning, The chimes began to hum again, faint and irregular. Jack stood immediately, scanning the perimeter. "Something's moving," he said quietly. The Tharn lifted his head, gripping his weapon. The Avril stirred, whispering, "Another predator?" Jack listened closely. "No, more than one. Heavier steps. The pattern is wrong." Moments later, the first shadow appeared through the mist. A creature larger than any that had come before, its scales rippling like molten metal beneath the filtered light. Its limbs were broader, its head wider, and its breathing thundered through the air like a drumbeat. Behind it, two smaller predators followed, their movements coordinated. This was no random hunt. The instructors had released the apex pair, the final test. Jack's hand tightened around his spear. "Stay low," he said to the others. The Tharn hissed softly. "We can't fight that." Jack's eyes didn't waver from the advancing shadows. "We won't fight it. We'll make it fight us." The predators advanced slowly, cautious but confident. They had learned, too. His traps had taught them pain. The chimes began to ring in rapid rhythm, each note signaling a vibration of pressure. Jack moved to the left, drawing their attention with a short whistle. The largest creature turned its head sharply, its nostrils flaring as it located the sound. The smaller ones began circling, their tails slicing through the ferns. The Tharn raised his weapon, but Jack motioned for him to wait. Timing was everything. When the lead predator took its first step into the outer perimeter, one of the bone barriers snapped under its weight. The sound echoed through the forest like a crack of thunder. The creature lunged forward, furious, and the others followed. The first fell into a shallow pit, roaring as its claws scraped against spikes, but it wasn't enough to stop it. Jack darted across the clearing, leading it toward the deeper traps. The Tharn shouted after him, but he didn't look back. His movements were precise, almost mechanical, each footstep placed with the rhythm of memory. The apex predator lunged again, and Jack dove sideways, rolling across the mud as the beast crashed into the disguised trap. The ground split open, and the creature fell halfway through, its torso impaled on jagged ribs. Its screams were deafening, shaking the chimes until they clattered madly. The two smaller ones hesitated, fear flickering in their movement for the first time. Jack didn't waste the moment. He snatched a bone-tipped spear from the ground and hurled it at the nearest beast, striking just below the eye. The creature recoiled with a violent hiss, thrashing backward into another pit. The Tharn, seeing the chaos unfold, rushed forward, driving his improvised blade into the wounded predator's neck. Blood sprayed in a black arc across the clearing. The Avril, too weak to stand, called out weakly for him to stop, but Jack's focus remained absolute. The apex predator still moved. It roared, tearing free from the pit's edge, dragging its bleeding body across the soil. The spikes had slowed it, but not stopped it. Jack grabbed another spear and faced it directly. He stood his ground as the creature charged again. The air quaked from its steps. At the last instant, he sidestepped and drove the spear upward with all his strength. The tip pierced the soft underside of the creature's jaw, plunging deep into its skull. The beast's momentum carried it forward another few meters before it collapsed with a shuddering thud that sent dust rising into the air. The forest fell silent. The chimes swayed one last time before going still. Jack remained standing for several seconds, his breath steady but shallow. His arm trembled from the impact, blood trickling down his sleeve. The Tharn approached slowly, staring at the fallen monsters. "It's over," he said, his voice low. Jack looked at him. "No, it's finished." The Avril tried to rise but sank back against the roots. Her face was pale, her lips dry. Jack knelt beside her and pressed a hand to her shoulder. "It's done," he said quietly. "The trial ends today." She smiled faintly. "You made the jungle quiet." Her eyes fluttered closed, but her breathing remained. She was still alive, barely. Above them, the faint hum of engines began to echo through the canopy. The retrieval ships were descending, their metallic silhouettes breaking through the mist. The forest reacted as if it sensed intrusion. Birds burst from the trees, insects scattered, and the air filled with a strange electric charge. The Tharn stepped forward, gazing upward in disbelief. "We're going home." Jack didn't move. He looked at the forest instead, the traps, the bones, the chimes, all silent, all still. He realized with a deep, quiet certainty that leaving didn't mean returning. The person who had entered the trial had already vanished. The retrieval platform landed in the clearing, kicking up waves of dust and broken leaves. Armed personnel in armor stepped out, scanning the area. One of them spoke into his communicator. 3 survivors confirmed. The others began marking coordinates for the fallen predators. As they approached, one of them hesitated, staring at the crude defense structures surrounding the camp. "He built this?" another asked. "Without tech?" The first nodded slowly. "Looks like it." Commander Vorin himself arrived moments later, his figure imposing in polished armor. His expression was unreadable as he looked at the human standing amidst the ruin of the forest. "Cadet Raynor," he said, his voice amplified through the comm. "The trial is complete. Your endurance has exceeded projections." Jack didn't respond immediately. He watched the commander, his face calm but distant. "It wasn't endurance," he said. "It was adaptation." Vorin's gaze shifted toward the chimes swaying in the soft wind. "You turned the predator's territory into a defense network," he said. "You used their remains as material. You altered the environment to respond to you. No one has ever done that." Jack's voice was low but firm. "Because no one stopped to listen." The commander studied him for a long moment, then nodded. "Retrieve the others," he ordered. The medics rushed to assist the Avril, lifting her carefully onto a stretcher. The Tharn followed the soldiers reluctantly, casting one last glance at Jack before boarding the platform. Jack lingered, his gaze fixed on the forest. The air was heavy with stillness. The chimes made no sound, yet he could still hear their echo in his mind. The rhythm of survival, the pulse of the world that had once tried to kill him. He bent down and picked up a small bone from the ground, smooth and polished by the wind. He turned it in his hand, then slipped it into his pocket before walking toward the platform. As the ship ascended, the clearing shrank beneath him. The traps disappeared beneath layers of mist. From above, it all looked peaceful, almost beautiful, the kind of serenity only nature could pretend to have after violence. Jack watched until the forest became a smear of green far below. The commander approached him once more. "You understand this will be studied," he said. "Your methods, your instincts. The Academy will use this for years to come." Jack looked out the window, his expression unreadable. "Then let them study. But don't call it instinct. Instinct is blind. This was choice." When the ship broke through the upper atmosphere, the light shifted from green to white. The trial world disappeared behind clouds, silent once more. Jack leaned back in his seat, the faint sound of bone chimes still echoing in his memory like a heartbeat. The jungle had tested him, consumed him, and reshaped him. But in the end, he had remade it in his image. And as the ship carried him away from Carvel, the instructors marked the end of the simulation in their reports with a single note. Subject Raynor redefined the meaning of survival. The predators were not the lesson. He was.